Our next goal is to find the entry point for the primordial question of the essence of history, that is, for the existential construction of historicity. This point is designated by what is primarily historical. Thus, our reflections begin with a characterization of what is meant by the expressions history, Geschichte, and historical, Geschichtlich, in the vulgar interpretation of Dasein. They are ambiguous. The most obvious ambiguity of the term history has often been noted, and it is by no means vague. It makes itself known in the fact that it means historical reality, as well as the possibility of a science of it. We shall provisionally discard the meaning of history in the sense of a science of history, historiography. Among the meanings of the expression history that refer neither to the science of history nor history as an object, but rather to this being seend itself which has not necessarily been objectified, the one in which this being is understood as something past claims a preeminent use. This significance makes itself known in talk such as this or that already belongs to history. Here past means on the one hand no longer present vorhanden, or else indeed still present, but without effect, Wirkung on the present Gegenwart. However, what is historical as what is past also has the opposite significance when we say that one cannot evade history. Here history means what is but is nevertheless still consequential naturcan. However, what is historical as what is past is understood in a positively or privatively effective relation to the present, in the sense of what is real now and today. The past has a remarkable double meaning here. Here the past belongs irrevocably to an earlier time. It belonged to former events and can yet still be present now, for example, the remains of a Greek temple. A bit of the past is still present in it. Thus history does not so much mean the past in the sense of what is past, but the derivation Herkunft from it. Whatever has a history is in the nexus of a becoming. In such becoming the development is sometimes a rise, sometimes a fall. Whatever has a history in this way can at the same time make history. Epoch making, it presently defines a future, Zukunft. Here history means an event nexus that is a productive nexus that moves through the past, the present, and the future. Here the past has no special priority. Furthermore, history signifies the whole of beings that change in time, the transformations and destinies of humankind, human institutions and their cultures, as distinct from nature that similarly moves in time. In this instance, history does not so much mean the kind of being sane, the occurrence, as the region of beings that one distinguishes from nature with regard to the essential determination of the existence of human being as spirit and culture, although nature, too, belongs in a way to history thus understood. And finally, what has been handed down as such is taken to be historical, whether it be known historiographically or taken over as being self-evident and concealed in its derivation. If we consider the four meanings together, we find that history is the specific occurrence of existing Dasein happening in time, in such a way that the occurrence, which in being with one another is past, and at the same time, handed down is überliefert and still having an effect, is taken to be history in the sense emphasized. Four meanings have a connection in that they are related to human being as the subject of events. How is the kind of occurrence of these events to be determined? Is the occurrence a succession of processes, a changing appearance and disappearance of events? In what way does this occurrence of history belong to Dasein? Is Dasein factically already objectively present beforehand, and then at times gets into a history? Does Dasein first become historical through a concatenation of circumstances and events? Or is the being of Dasein first constituted by occurrence, so that only because Dasein is historical in its being are anything like circumstances, events, and destinies ontologically possible? Why does the function of the past get emphasized in the temporal characterization of Dasein occurring in time? If history belongs to the being of Dasein, and if this being sane is grounded in temporality, it seems logical to begin the existential analysis of historicity with those characteristics of what is historical that evidently have a temporal meaning. Thus, a more precise characterization of the remarkable priority of the past, in the concept of history, should prepare the exposition of the fundamental constitution of historicity. The antiquities preserved in museums, for example, household things, belong to a time past, and are yet still objectively present in the present. How are these useful things historical when they are, after all, not yet past? Only because they became an object of historiographical interest, of the cultivation of antiquity and national lore. But such useful things can only, after all, be historiographical objects, because they are somehow in themselves historical. We repeat the question: with what justification do we call these beings historical when they are not yet past? Or do these things, in themselves, yet have something past about them although they are still objectively present today? Are these objectively present things then still what they were? Evidently these things have changed. The tools have become fragile and wormy in the course of time. But the specific character of the past that makes them something historical does not lie in this transience that continues even during their objective presence in the museum. But then what is past about the useful thing? What were the things that they no longer are today? They are still definite useful things, but out of use. However, if they were still in use, like many heirlooms in the household, would they then not be historical? Whether in use or out of use, they are no longer what they were. What is past? Nothing other than the world within which they were encountered as things at hand, belonging to a context of useful things, and used by heedful Dasein existing in the world. That world is no longer. But what was previously inner-worldly in that world is still objectively present. As useful things belonging to that world, what is now still objectively present can nevertheless belong to the past. But what does it mean that the world no longer is? World is only in the mode of existing Dasein, which, as being in the world, is factical. The historical character of antiquities that have been preserved is thus grounded in the past of that Dasein to whose world that past belonged. According to this, only past Dasein would be historical, but not present Dasein. However, can Dasein be past at all if we define past as now no longer present or at hand? Obviously, Dasein can never be past, not because it is imperishable, but because it can essentially never be objectively present. Rather, if it is, it exists. But a Dasein that no longer exists is not past in the ontologically strict sense. It is rather having been there da Juisen. The antiquities still objectively present have a past and a character of history because they belong to useful things and originate from a world that has been the world of a Dasein that has been there. Dasein is what is primarily historical. But does Dasein first become historical by no longer being there? Or is it historical precisely as factically existing? Is Dasein something that has been only in the sense of having been there, or has it been as something making present and futural, that is, in the temporalizing of its temporality? From this preliminary analysis of the useful things belonging to history that are still objectively present, and yet somehow past, it becomes clear that this kind of being Ciens is historical only on the basis of its belonging to the world. But the world has a historical kind of being, because it constitutes an ontological determination of Dasein. Furthermore, we can see that when one designates a time as the past, the meaning of this is not unequivocal, but the past, Vergangenheit, is obviously distinct from having been Juisenheit, which we came to know as a constituent of the ecstatic unity of the temporality of Dasein. But saying this only makes the enigma more acute. Why is it that precisely the past, or, more appropriately, the having been predominantly determines what is historical when, after all, having been temporalizes itself equiprimordially with present and future? We asserted that Dasein is what is primarily historical. But secondarily historical is what is encountered within the world, not only useful things at hand in the broadest sense, but also nature in the surrounding world as the historical ground. We call beings unlike Dasein that are historical by reason of their belonging to the world that which is world historic. It can be shown that the vulgar concept of world history arises precisely from our orientation toward what is secondarily historical. What is world historical is not first historical on the basis of a historiographical objectification, but rather as the being that is in itself encountered in the world. The analysis of the historical character of a useful thing still objectively present not only led us back to Dasein as what is primarily historical, but at the same time made it dubious whether the temporal characteristics of what is historical should be primarily oriented toward the being in time of something objectively present at all. Beings do not become more historical as we go on to past ever farther away, so that what is most ancient would be the most authentically historical. However, the temporal distance from now and today has no primarily constitutive significance for the historicity of authentically historical beings, not because they are not in time or are timeless, but rather because they primordially exist temporally in a way that nothing objectively present in time, whether passing away or coming into being, could ever, by its ontological essence, be temporal in such a way. It will be said that these are overly complicated remarks. No one denies that human existence is basically the primary subject of history, and the vulgar concept of history cited says this clearly enough. The thesis that Dasein is historical not only refers to the ontic fact that human being represents a more or less important atom in the business of world history and remains the plaything of circumstances and events, but poses the problem why, and on the basis of what ontological conditions, does historicity belong to the subjectivity of the historical subject as its essential constitution.